everyone, and welcome to our Tech Talk webinar. We're happy that you could join us today. My name is Eden, and I'm on the marketing team here at Sunset Learning. Sunset Learning develops and delivers scalable technical learning solutions to our technology partners and their customers to help optimize technology investments, improve job performance, grow revenue, reduce costs, mitigate risks, and ultimately increase customer and employee satisfaction. I'm here with James Stanger, who is CompTIA's Chief Technology Evangelist. He's worked extensively with emerging and newly adopted technologies and has helped create education and certification programs. In this presentation, he's going to be discussing CompTIA career pathways and how they can give you career-defining skills. And with that, I'll hand it over to James.
Hey, thanks so much, Eden. I appreciate it. Just to make sure you can hear me, I'm curious where you're joining in from. I am joining in from Seattle, Washington. I tell people Seattle because nobody knows where Olympia, Washington is. So if you could open up your chat window, if you go up to the little, I call it applet that for this Zoom session, you can go in and open up the chat window and we can contact each other that way. You can go ahead and use the Q&A window if you want, but it's probably easiest if you just talk via the webinar chat. So let's see, we've got Chicago. Welcome, Chicago. Hey, how you doing, Denver? Good to have you here, everybody. So let's talk a bit about why you should get into the IT profession and what is it that we do. It's not so much, what IT folks do. I think everybody has an idea about it, but I'm lucky enough as the Chief Technology Evangelist at CompTIA to talk to IT professionals, hiring managers, CIOs, other people with the word chief in them, all these people who hire people. I'm lucky enough to do that around the world. I've done that. I'll be talking to a few people here tomorrow in New Jersey and New York City. Last week I was in Chicago. The week before that, a couple weeks before that, I was in Nashville and Manhattan again. Let's see, before then was Washington, D.C. And then I had done a tour in, India, Singapore, and Thailand. Before that, the UK. This year's been a busy time. New Zealand, the UK again. Just giving you a sense that that not only do we do a ton of research at CompTIA, but remote research and things, but we do it also in person. You're going to see pictures throughout. That's me standing in various places. The 40-foot is in Dublin, more or less Dublin, Ireland. Let's see, that me waving at you with the scuba gear. I'm in the Orkney Islands diving World War I and World War II wrecks. And then that other one there with me standing there is in Teton. So I've done a lot of work, folks, as a working security professional and an IT professional. Over the years, I've done consulting in all sorts of areas, making IT work. So I don't just do instructional design, which I've done, or design certifications or help work with training like I do in CompTIA, but also as a working professional. So I'm happy to be here. If you've never heard of CompTIA before, we're an education company. We're a global not-for-profit, and we do what industry tells us to do. We have a lot of members. Some of those members could be a very small company, a managed service provider just down the road from you, just a few miles away, very likely. Could be also be very large companies that might be near you. I'm talking large companies like Dell, for example. And our members talk to us, and we do a tremendous amount of research in there to represent the IT industry. That's why we got into A+, Security Plus, Network Plus, all sorts of pluses, because the industry needs the confidence to move forward. I always say there's a confidence gap, not only in learners, but also in organizations that want to move forward and use tech in a really smart way. And that's why we need you to help understand what IT is all about. So I want to talk about some critical first steps for your career, why it's important to start at the right beginning, okay? And everybody has to make a beginning somewhere. So let's talk about what that could be. I also want to talk about specific needs that the industry has for you. Because we're kind of a revolutionized workforce. It's a fancy way of saying we've seen a lot of change, not only because of COVID. I think there's a lot of social awareness that people have developed and kind of matured on over the last few years. What does it mean to join the workforce? And what are some of the smart choices you can make for yourself as the workforce changes? It's more remote now, right? And that's something that's going to continue. It always was a trend. Before COVID, but obviously COVID accelerated that. And so I want to talk to you about, what it means to be a skillable IT worker. And that's a term I came up with. The the idea that we're always about upskilling at CompTIA, whether it be learning about how networks work or how a mobile phone works, not just how to use it, but really how to support it as a tech professional, to get underneath the hood. Skillability means that, do you have the right foundation of learning so that as soon as there's some sort of radical change that happens, like tons of remote workers, right? Can you keep your feet there? As the cloud changes, whatever the cloud is, or as security models change with new fancy encryption that basically is, how should I put it, resistant to tampering, right? Tampering of quantum computing. A lot of bad guys use quantum computing, very advanced computing, to defeat encryption that we've been using for 30 years. Can you keep your feet and understand, well, okay, I've got the basics. As things change, I can, roll with those changes. It's stuff like that I mean by skillability or future-proofing your skills. I'm not sure you can future-proof anything, but if you have the right foundation, the future can't be all that scary. So how do you get started? Okay, it's all about pathways to me. And that's me walking. Where am I? I am in the Cornwall, England there. I get lucky sometimes because I have a couple of days extra in between all the business meetings that I have, and I'm able to visit beautiful places like this. But I think when you get started, it feels like you're kind of walking a tightrope, as it were, or you're walking a kind of a perilous area here. Because if I'd have made a mistake on either side, that could have been, ended badly, right? Because there's so many job roles and so many skills. And I think also a lot of anxiety people have, like, how can I start? Where do I get going? Well, take a look at this little page here that I kind of an eye chart of a slide deck here, but the marketing folks at CompTIA put this together, and they did a great job because there are so many ways that you can get started. One of the common ways people get started in the profession is to be a help desk worker or a IT support specialist. Okay. I have known people who got started as networking specialists, it's kind of a junior network specialist. Security is something that you'll work your way into, but that's obviously another set of job roles. And it's funny, under IT support specialists, there are various job roles underneath that. You can become a field tech, for example, that might go out and support remote workers when they have a hardware issue and they need somebody to fix that problem. More importantly, though, I think when it comes to IT support specialists, you can become somebody, for example, who supports cell phone towers, those big, huge towers. I know a person who got started in the IT profession driving around each of those towers and upgrading the firmware. They actually walk up into buildings or even climb up into the tower and update the firmware in those cell towers so that everybody's phones would work right. So there are a lot of job roles underneath any of these particular, how should I call it, boxes. And again, folks, if you have any questions at all, feel free to ask them on the webinar chat, or you can use the Q&A applet as well if you want. But the question becomes, what are the hiring managers looking for? Because there is serious industry demand here. You may have heard about various layoffs in the tech sector or whatever like that. Don't let any of those noisy headlines distract you. Let me tell you a real quick story. I always tell people I have a PhD in unemployment. I do. It's a PhD in English. About 30 years ago now, I was ready to go get that job as a college professor, et cetera, et cetera. And I was offered a couple of jobs, don't get me wrong. But I realized that back then, my wife and I had 2 3/4 kids at that point, or 2 2/3 anyway. And I realized it was time to get into a profession that had a future, that was really something that could really provide for my family. And that's why I went and got into IT and also IT education. So I'm a retread, as a friend of mine calls it. I shifted and made that transition over into IT. You can do the same thing. But what I want to point out here is that I wanted to get into an area where there was real demand, and there is demand. And yes, there's news of layoffs and things like that, but let's put it this way. We would have to go through years of serious layoffs to get out of the record territory that we're in right now, where there are a record number of jobs and few people applying for them. So just think of it that way. It's a pretty interesting place to be in that kind of demand. And the way that you can be in that kind of demand is to focus on skills for help desk, or say network admin, or the cloud, or Linux. to get the right foundations. So let me talk for a second about some of the industry challenges that we have, because there are some gaps there. So there's a picture I took that was in upstate New York, a place that I hiked. I actually hiked through that crack there, kind of climbed my way up there. And I was assisted by a few ladders and things like that. I'm no mountain climber. I mean, no way. But your job is to help improve or solve the confidence gap, right, that a lot of organizations are having. So let's talk about these pillars of IT, and we're going to refine this at CompTIA, but I want to start you with, there's infrastructure, meaning servers and firewalls and our mobile phones, our workstations, the stuff, the communications protocols, the computers, etc., that make the internet work. Then there's security. How do we make sure that's all securely done? There's development, meaning people who create code, right, for all the hardware to work. And then data. Those are kind of 4 different areas. And we call those the pillars of IT. And even as we refine this, just think about those 4 different ways, because it might be that you have a mindset or an interest in going into development to be a coder, which is great. We can support you there at CompTIA. Regardless of where you go into infrastructure, you might become the next cloud genius to work for a friend of mine named Robert Venier. Robert is a guy who works for a company called AstraZeneca, which you may have heard of. They put out one of the vaccines. He is over all of the cloud and data center, the infrastructure for all of AstraZeneca, a huge company. They're a multinational organization. Maybe you go to work for him, or you might work for somebody I know named Robin Hunt, who is a data analyst. She does a tremendous amount of work doing data analytics. You might be a developer for a friend of mine named Kash Arwan, who works for Amazon. I'm sure you've heard of Amazon. He works for Amazon, leading developers, hundreds of thousands of developers that he works with. You might work for a friend of mine named Tim Crothers, who is the executive vice president over at Target, that helps secure their systems, right? But they all have challenges. And the real root cause of these challenges is that we're more reliant on technology than ever before, right? A lot of organizations worldwide, very small ones, very large ones, have in their own way held technology kind of away from them at arm's length, right? Well, they've had to embrace it, right? Because we have remote workers and remote IT workers. We have serious issues with the lack of experience and the lack of foundational knowledge. And we are experiencing a sea change. And there's me standing I took this picture just this past Thanksgiving here in November. It's a place where I like to go and scare my kids. They used to go down with me, but now their wives won't let them go down there and play there because the waves can sometimes get a little overwhelming. And what we're seeing here is the same thing in IT. It used to be, hey, we can, the waves weren't too big. There weren't that many changes. We're seeing huge changes, and it causes a lot of people and organizations to kind of worry about getting overwhelmed. One of my kids' friends was with us on Thanksgiving, and he said, I took this picture of you, James, and then I ran for my life. Here's the thing. A lot of people kind of feel that way because they really don't feel that they're ready to handle the remote workforce, that they don't have the skills they need. But you can. And these are pictures of people I've taken worldwide. Let's see, some of those people are from Argentina, bottom right. Some of those people on the bottom left are people that I met and re-met in Goa, India, while I was there this year. And the top there, that was a picture, if I remember correctly, I took in Baltimore, Maryland. These are all workers who have made the transition to becoming IT workers. And when it comes to scalability, people will often talk about the tech skills, and that's great. Then people will say, well, it's also about durable skills, which is a phrase I don't particularly like, or soft skills. I call them business skills. The idea, but it's more than just, being able to show up on time. It's more than just being able to write well or to have emotional IQ. These are all essential elements of the skillable worker. So is technology. But you need to know how a business thinks and works. And you need to be able to ask the right questions about how a business works, because that way you can map technology to business. Technology by itself is, groovy, it's fun, whatever. But it's kind of like, if it's just sitting by itself, it's like an engine or a transmission just kind of just idling away and not doing any real work. Your job as a tech professional is to put technology to work. And to me, scalability means that you know how tech is used in a business. So hands-on skills, of course, are essential. None of this can be theoretical. But even if you have practical skills in using networking routers, okay, or practical skills in coding, or practical skills in making the cloud work, if it's not supporting the business, then you got a problem. This is why critical thinking and collaboration and things are so important. Because the whole idea is that as we kind of reset expectations between the worker and the company these days, we kind of have, they call it the great resetting or the great resignation or whatever. It's really about the idea of you transitioning in to learning the right kinds of skills. So let's talk about some of those needs. First, we live in what I call a cloud-first hybrid world. And what I mean by that is this: a lot of the servers and services that people look for and use, excuse me, are first in the cloud. We've seen a lot of transitioning to the cloud over the last 10 years. We've been talking about the cloud for 20 years, but it's only been in the last 5-10 years that people have actually gotten serious about it, really, truly serious about it. And some people will say, well, that means that there's never going to be another server installed in a server room ever again. It's just all going to be up in the cloud. I've heard that's very extreme perspective, and that's not really the case. We're going to live in a world where we're going to have the cloud, and that'll probably be the first choice. Well, what's available? How can we leverage that? How can we leverage AWS or Azure or Google Cloud or whatever? That's great. That's the cloud. But data centers have been around for decades, and they will continue to be around. So this is what I mean by hybrid: cloud and then data centers. A data center is something that might be in your region. Might be if you live in Denver or if you live in Chicago, might be in that, Denver land or Chicago land area, right? But a data center could also be across the country or in another place around the world. It's not the cloud, because the cloud would be something run by AWS or by IBM Cloud or Oracle Cloud or Microsoft Azure. When it comes to data centers, that's a data center that is run by a third party, but probably not Amazon or any of those others. And so it's another way of providing computing functionality. And then you might even use installed, or what some people will call enterprise. And that's the stuff like if you work for a company or have been in a company that had a server room, right? That's what I mean. None of these things is fully going away. The cloud will be always here, but data centers and enterprise will always be here. We need networking professionals, people with networking experience. Okay, that's a real gap that the industry has. Too often people want to talk about, hey, let's get right into security, or let's get right into development, or Linux is my friend. These are all great things. But what I think people forget is that you've got to network all these things together. And so we need professionals who can help connect people. We need people who understand the protocols that are used, and to basically make it possible to prioritize traffic or deprioritize traffic. And there are fancy terms that we can talk about: routers and switches, and we can even talk about software-defined networking, SD-WAN, very advanced things. But as we use the cloud or data centers or installed, we've got to make sure that the data, which is kind of like drops of rain, actually makes it to the location, okay? So think of it, in any sort of ecosystem there. And this picture is meant to help you understand that. Think about it as a cloud. Let's think about it this way. As it rains, we've all experienced rain before. Those drops of rain are the data, right? Well, that will collect into little pools and puddles, and then eventually into streams, right? Eventually maybe into a lake, and then maybe into a huge river going to an ocean. Well, you can analogize those drops of rain as data, and then dropping into something like an edge network node, and then dropping into a little pool of data that could be maybe a data center. Or it could go into a lake, which could be something that's literally called a data lake. You can Google that. We need people who can understand the flow of that data and support it as networkers. When it comes to the cloud, there are about 5 different major challenges that we experience worldwide. And that's basically people don't understand the resources that are there. My friend, Robert Vanier, who works at AstraZeneca, said the cloud changes about every 3 weeks in a big, huge way, right? And the only way you can understand that is to get your foundations correct. But so there's kind of lack of resources and people who really understand how the cloud works. They don't understand network connectivity very well. We have the ability for people to say, okay, I see your business need. I'm going to provision resources in the cloud that don't spend too much money, but also do provide the right resources. Achieving that balance is tough. It requires some training. We also need people who know how to secure the cloud and then to manage the spend. Okay, make sure you're not spending too much money. These are kind of the top 5 cloud challenges. And we've seen a lot of movement into the cloud, and there are new job roles and things. But here's a friend of mine, a person I know, his name is Anthony Putorik. He works for Microsoft, and he says the lack of cloud-specific skills has slowed adoption. This is what I mean by the confidence gap. Now, when it comes to security, here are the big 4 attacks, okay? I won't go into great detail about it, but we need people who can identify and manage these types of attacks that can protect computing systems, that can protect people from these kind of attacks. An advanced persistent threat is basically where a very well-funded individual, that could be funded by a particular state, and I don't mean state of the union in the US, I mean some sort of country, that gives them enough funding so that they can work very stealthily and they can lurk around in your system for weeks, days, weeks, months, maybe even years, to modify data, to steal data, to gain intelligence. So they never announce their presence. But nowadays, there are a lot of people who have the skills that don't necessarily have funding from a government who can do advanced persistent threats. Ransomware is something that's very obvious. It announces its presence. It locks your system and says, hey, you better pay me money, and then I'll give you your computer back. Sometimes you actually get your computer back. Sometimes you don't. So how do you protect against these things? Well, for an advanced persistent threat, you need really good listening devices, as it were, listening functionality to listen for what those bad guys do, for the noise they make. Because even though they're very quiet, they still do make noise. And it's a question of adjusting your systems to catch that. Ransomware, well, backup is the #1 defense against ransomware. If somebody ransomwares your phone, well, imagine if a good IT professional says, yeah, I'm sorry that happened. Tell you what, we've got all your data backed up. It's not ransomware. We'll blow away all that bad stuff and put something on that and re-image your phone and get that stuff back on there and add a little bit of code so that your phone doesn't get ransomware, right? That's the ideal solution. Easier said than done sometimes, many times. Supply chain attacks are pretty simple. It's the idea really that as you get supplied something, a new software update or a new piece of hardware, it's possible, and it's happened many times, where that new piece of software actually has bad code embedded in it. Some really smart person poisoned the well, as it were, and then you end up getting a supply of bad things that you end up using, and it causes security problems. And distributed denial of service attack means using a lot of different computers around the world to either send floods of packets or a certain number of smaller packets to crash routers, computers, things like that. Those are the big 4. There are a lot of job roles and job skills, and I think I've alluded to some of them, because we need security analysts who can listen in very carefully to find that advanced persistent threat. We need pen testers who can go in and generate noise that helps the security analysts go, oh, that's what that hack sounds like and looks like. Now I know what security tools to bring to bear and services to fix things. We need compliance managers who can say, okay, look, you're a company that takes credit cards, right? Let's say you work for a company that takes credit cards. There are all sorts of rules that you have to follow. There's an agency out, it's not an agency, it's a standard out there in an organization called the payment card industry. And they have standards, the DSS standards, that you have to prove that you're compliant to. Otherwise, they'll take the credit card functionality away from you. You won't be able to do your business, right? We need cloud security managers and consultants. And all of these people need to understand how endpoints work. And by endpoints, I'm talking about the computer that you're using right now to listen to this, right? But also the router that you are using, right, to connect to the internet so that we can have this session. All of these elements, folks, are really important. And it's important that as you learn that you don't stampede into, okay, I'm going to be a security person. That's interesting to me. And forget all that other stuff. I'm just going to do security. There's no easy way to get into it, but there are possible ways to get into security. And you can't really skip too many steps, because then you'll have huge gaps in your knowledge that sooner or later will bite you, right? I'm not sure a gap can bite you, but let's put it this way. The gap can cause problems and you'll fall into that gap. Okay. So the skills that you need are really important. So when it comes to security job roles, for example, security analytics is the fastest growing job role. Some people will call security analysts the blue team. Pen testers are the red team, right? The red team generating the red alerts, right? The listeners, right, are the blue team, the security analysts. That's the fastest growing job role. Not only because sometimes cybersecurity analysts are seen as a junior job role, but I've also seen cybersecurity analytics being applied to very, very sophisticated, very high end, and that's usually where I see them. But we need people who understand network security, who understand endpoint security, how to secure that mobile phone, et cetera, your notebook computer, your laptop, whatever. We need people who understand data privacy. These are all top job roles. And I'm going to move on, and this slide deck will make it available for you. But as people get started down this profession, so I've talked about a lot of these different things that are important for you to learn. I think a lot of people start thinking to themselves, geez, I can't learn that. And I thought that myself as I started getting into IT. I'm like, this is overwhelming. And the first answer is you just start learning step by step and at the beginning. And the beginning is really getting technical foundations. And I'll talk about that in a second. But a lot of people, I think, have a lot of misconceptions. That's a term, or misconceptions, but they have a lot of myths in their life about technology. And that's a picture if you're a Led Zeppelin fan, that's off of the House of the Holy album. That is the Giant's Causeway in Northern Ireland. A really beautiful place. Let's talk, and it is a very mythical sort of place. It's called the Giant's Causeway because the idea is that giants supposedly walked out of the earth step by step on those little steps there. But anyway, I think there are a lot of people who have a lot of myths in their life about, well, I don't know if I can get started on this. Because I have to have a 4-year degree, right, to even get into IT. More and more, we're seeing organizations kind of move away from that 4-year degree requirement. Sure, there are a lot of organizations that still require it, but trust me, there are ways to get into IT without that 4-year degree. So don't let yourself go, okay, I have to get that 4-year degree and then maybe I'll start learning IT. That's a misconception. A lot of people think, hey, I'm not a math genius, so I could never do IT. I've done a lot of IT in my life. It's been fun. I've been involved in a lot of sophisticated stuff, right? I'm a lousy math person. It's only the last few years that I've been able to do any sort of math in my head. I have no idea why I can do that suddenly, but anyway, you don't have to be a math and calculus expert to get into IT. Okay, don't let that dissuade you. A lot of people will say, well, geez, I don't have any background in anything, in IT. Trust me, your background is in fact relevant. I know a person who was an Uber driver for years, got into IT, and the person got a first job was in a help desk and service desk. He said, well, instead of driving people from one place to the other, I remotely take them from, their broken computer, and then I fix it. He said it's a very similar journey. There's a lot of customer service. There's, hey, how you doing? There's also, well, where do you want to go today? What's the issue? That person told me it was really possible to leverage that previous experience. So whatever service job you may have or what have you, trust me, you can leverage that skill. I learned how to write fairly well while I got my PhD in English. The first job I was ever offered as a pen tester was a job that said, yeah, James, you got some pen testing skills. That's great. Pretty good. But none of us likes to write. You do like to write, and pen testing. So see, I leveraged that writing skill and into my first job offer, major job offer in the IT space. Just something to think about. IT workers, sometimes people think, well, I'm in my 30s or my 20s or 40s. I'm too old to restart. No, that's a nonsense. That's a misconception. You don't have to start at the age of 10. Okay. A lot of people think, well, you're talking, James, about endpoints, routers, firewalls and stuff, and cloud. I thought all jobs were in development. Well, yeah, there are a lot of jobs as coders, but you don't have to become a developer to go into IT, is my point. There are a lot of different ways in which you can look into this. In my opinion, every one of those jobs has a foundational set of knowledge that you have to get first, and then you can branch off into it. But you don't have to be a developer if you don't want it. A lot of people, it's like, well, isn't there kind of this toxic bro culture that goes on in IT? And it's a reality, right? But not all of them are, okay? There is room for diversity in IT. That's something that you can investigate and think about. Trust me, we need that kind of diversity. Everybody recognizes it. Anybody worth talking to recognizes it. There's this idea out there. I've talked to both new professionals, new IT pros, or even people transitioning into IT. I've talked to people who are, been in IT for 20 years, who kind of get confused about the next steps to take because there's not a well-defined career pathway. And at CompTIA, we've done a lot to get over that misconception because there are pathways available to you. We'll be showing you that here. That Sunset Learning and CompTIA have been put together. Some people will say there's no one to help me get started. Well, we've got Sunset Learning to help you get started. You can also look at the CompTIA objectives for A+, for example, that teaches endpoints, that teaches service desk. Those objectives, folks, were not come up with by just one person or a couple of people or a few academics or whatever. It was literally created. That body of knowledge was created by thousands, literally thousands of working IT professionals. Those objectives are kind of a mentor to you. So you can get a mentor, use LinkedIn and get a mentor. But think of it this way, those objectives tell you what's important and what's not. One of the first things that I ever did when I started getting into IT is I got a couple of mentors who, for whatever reason, decided that they wanted to waste an hour or so a week or a few hours a week showing this James guy, well, here's how things work. Getting that kind of mentor is important, and CompTIA can be that mentor with Sunset Learning. All right. A tech foundation is really important because it's kind of like in a building. If you don't have a good foundation, that building falls apart. That's what is that? That's Reeves Abbey in England. It did have a great foundation, but Henry VIII came along and tore the building down. So that's a ruined abbey from the 16th century. 16th century? Yeah. So how can you take the right first step that you have so you have a good foundation? And you could look at this, folks, in two ways. One, hey, I want to have a good career foundation. I want to get started. Help desk is a great way to start. So that's what I'm going to do. That's fine. It's kind of a career foundation, kind of a career positioning look at it. But the way I look at it is that A+ is something that's really good to get you understanding all of the different physical endpoints that you're going to be supporting for the rest of your IT life. And by endpoints, I mean servers, routers, firewalls, intrusion detection devices, security information event monitoring tools, all those endpoints, right? A+ teaches that. Network Plus teaches you how all those devices talk to each other. Security Plus teaches you how to secure all that stuff. So you get the idea of what some people will call the CompTIA Big Three. But these things do more than just position you for a particular job role or a particular job skill. It gives you that right foundation so that you can go, okay, I can pivot from one thing to the next. And it's that kind of IT dexterity, the IT literacy, the skill ability that people are really looking for. When I say people, I'm talking hiring manager. So it's really important as you adjust your career to do this. Now, let me show you this. There's a person I know, his name is Mike Garrity. He is the CISO for the state of New Jersey. And he does a lot of work with the FBI, with Interpol, with many agencies inside of New Jersey, from the state police to school districts, et cetera. And he said basically that he's finding that 50% of the employees that come on in to him have to get remediary training. That's a fancy way of saying remedial training. That in his first year of employment, in the first year of employment, Mike finds that he has to retrain a lot of these folks. And he said this. He said, "You can't protect a network if you don't know how a network works." Now think about that. See, there are a lot of people who are discovering that as students come in out of schools or various places, they don't have that foundational knowledge. Kind of odd to think that because there's so many institutions that do a great job of training folks. But so I just wanted to give you that quote from Mike because that's not just my opinion. That's Mike's opinion, who is a hiring manager. Here's another person, Amorn Chamshui. He lives in Thailand. He's the Secretary General for the NCSA. They're responsible for incident response. Back in 2018, Thailand got hit really hard. Their banks got hit really hard, and they set up a bunch of listening stations called Security Operations Centers, a SOC. And he basically said that a lot of his experienced workers still don't have the foundations. And I was lucky enough he asked us to go over there and do some training for them And so I was able to go to Thailand and do that training. And while we did it, we did the same thing in India and Singapore. I've also done the same thing in Hawaii and here in the United States and also the UK, because it's a problem that exists worldwide. If you go into the workforce with the right foundations, you'll be ahead of people that have been in the profession for 20 years. Think of that. You'll have a unique set of skills, or at least a desirable set of skills. Anthony Potoric, who I mentioned earlier, basically said fundamentals will let you keep your feet as the technical ground shifts underneath you. Because here are some questions. These are questions that a friend of mine sent me that were actually asked him during an interview. That the interview people didn't ask about, what happens when you go to CompTIA.org. They put their own company name in there. But notice what they're asking. They're asking these questions about fancy things like recursive DNS. And I won't go into what recursive DNS is, but as you learn the foundations, you'll be able to go, oh, yeah, well, recursive DNS is basically where if a DNS server, a name server, doesn't know how to resolve a name to an IP address, it'll just go talk to another server and get it, right? I've oversimplified that, but that's what recursive DNS is. But see, this is a question that's actually asked on an interview. And what you want to do when you're starting your career and when you're starting your learning, you want to be able to answer these types of questions, like, oh, yeah, okay, here's my sense of that, and answer that with confidence. Because, see, your confidence will then give the organization confidence to move forward to create some cool cloud thing or data center thing, some sort of new solution. But notice these questions. What's the difference between HTTP and HTTPS? Don't worry if you don't know the answer. But what you need to think about is, well, what training programs will give me that answer so that I won't get surprised too much by technical questions during an interview? So I just wanted to give you kind of how should I put this, a glimpse into that interview process, because if you have that knowledge, then you can go into that interview with confidence. Here's another set of questions having to do with Linux, and then kind of having to do with emotional IQ. I'm not saying you have to go and study Linux right away or whatever, but you do need a foundation, and Linux can be part of that. But these are some of the questions that are asked during a job interview. So let's talk for a second about what some of those fundamentals are. Again, I'm not going to geek out too much on this, at least I hope not. But you're looking here at a thing that is happening millions of times during this webinar, right? And this is called the TCP handshake, Transmission Control Protocol, TCP, right? And it's basically whereas your computer connects with the Zoom server, your computer will go, hey, are you there? That's the SYN packet. And then the Zoom server will go, yeah, I'm here. I'm acknowledging that you've connected to me, right? It's kind of like a handshake. When you first meet somebody and you shake their hand, that's what this is. And I'm not going to go into any more detail on this, but eventually TCP does this all of the time. So if your computer is using TCP for a session, it'll use that language. HTTP is another kind of language, another protocol that you will eventually learn, because you're now learning kind of how protocols, well, definitely how protocols talk, but kind of how applications talk, because most applications use HTTP, not all of them, and HTTPS. And here's the encrypted, here's TLS, or what people will call SSL. My point is that you'll learn about each of these kinds of handshakes and how they all operate. And as you learn this, how clients and servers talk to each other, how peer-based nodes talk to each other, how fancy ways of communicating work together, then you can start using applications. This here is something called Burp Suite, is where you're listening in on an HTTP connection, and you'll learn about what it means to set a cookie and what a session ID is and all that, whether it's PHP or whatever language. My point is, if you learn those fundamentals, then you can open the door to various careers as a programmer, as a security person, as a network genius. And I've seen people stick with networking. They don't even move into security. They're like, I love the idea of working with advanced technology to connect things. That's a great way to go. Some people go into the, if not server, but the cloud administration side of things. So they know Linux very well, and they know virtualization and automation really well. Things like Kubernetes and Kerberos. So one thing to learn, one of the basics, is something called the OSI-RM. It's a theoretical model, but what's cool is that it allows you to get very practical. So once you learn this model, it's really important to then apply it. So there's the physical layer. That's, the actual hardware. Okay. All the way up to the application layer. And application, in a sense, is the applications that you're using, your web browser or whatever, or even your Word doc, I suppose, because everything is network connected now. But there are all these different 7 layers that you'll be learning about it, And the good training programs are the ones that show you this in a hands-on way. And I am being a little facetious here, but there are additional layers of the OSIRM. Officially, there's only 7, but people will talk about layer 8, 9, and 10 in kind of a semi-joking way. The idea that, well, all of this is to support individuals or to support the organization. Compliance is another element. My point is that the OSIRM is a great way to start. It's one of those fundamentals. I mentioned the red team and the blue team, right? The idea of the pen testers and the security analysts. It's possible that as you apply security, you may become one or both of these, right? Some people will say red and blue together makes purple, right? Which it does. The purple team kind of combines both of those. That's fine. You might become a compliance specialist, or you might be somebody here who does a lot of visualization. In this case, this is something I created. It's a little visual diagram. I took a bunch of raw data, a bunch of log files, ugly log files, and I was able to kind of collect them and visualize them using something called the Elastic Stack. What is that? That's Logstash, Elastic, a search tool, and something called Kibana, starts with a K, Kibana. And I was able to visualize a denial of service attack, distributed denial of service attack. And I was able to identify what system was being attacked here. And that showed me a trend, right? That's kind of an example of what people will do. If a lot of times in security, people become compliance managers. That's because back in 2010, a lot of people felt that IT was something, how should I put it? That was just, security and IT was all combined. Well, the problem with that could be that if you combine security and infrastructure as one team, what usually happens is that people will say, well, security is not important. I've got to make sure that email works or that Zoom works or whatever critical business function works all the time. We don't have time for security. Well, after a few hacks, people realized by 2015, well, maybe you got to separate the people who provide the infrastructure from the people who secure it. And they'll have one team, the infrastructure people report to the CIO, and the cybersecurity people actually report to a different person. That way you have enforcement, right? And you have proper balance. Well, after a while, people realized, after some more hacks in 2015 or so, people realized you need a governance element, a management element as well. You may eventually become a person. I was just talking to a gentleman yesterday who he basically said, technical side is fine, but I'm really more interested in the management side. And there are tons of jobs out there, but they're only available if you have the right foundation. So when it comes to staying ahead of change, and I've already mentioned this, so I'll go over the slide very quickly, but Robert basically said, Vanier said, any cloud service changes its offering every 3 weeks. Now, some people will often say, well, technology changes at least every 18 months. People will use that 18-month term because they're borrowing the idea from Intel that CPU speeds double roughly about every 18 months or so. And, the idea that if that doubles, then technology changes every 18 months. But it's more than that. Technology changes very often. And if you have the right foundations, you'll be okay. Scalability and the future means that you have to have a digital fluency about it. You have to be conversant. You have to be natural to it. And I'll often hear people say, well, yeah, young people, they naturally, are attracted to technology. They know it better than old people, blah, blah, blah. I'm not talking about people who know how to use technology. I can't think of any good IT department that wants to hire somebody who can use technology. What they want is somebody who understands how technology is supported. See, that's different. And what you can do is make that transition from being just a consumer of IT, which we all are, to being a producer of business solutions using technology. See, you get underneath the hood of the car, as it were, right? That's what you need, right? And as you map things to business, we need people who can communicate well. We need people who understand the technology. So let me show you in the kind of conclusion here, a few resources that can help you make this transition. You can work obviously with Sunset Learning. That's, that's Institute. That's what you want to do. But there are some research here that I want to share with you that can help you learn about various kinds of job roles out there. There's something called cyberstates, cyberstates.org. Here it is. It's a web page that you can go to. This contains real-time information about the job openings available in your area. You can start with a state and then drill down, or you can start with a whole nation, and you can find, the overall, what kind of jobs are available. So as you hear about, layoffs or whatever the economy, go to cyberstates and find the real story. Don't let scare headlines and uninformed people kind of bend your thinking the wrong way. This is real-time information. It's not just a site that we put together 5 years ago or 3 months ago or whatever, and then it just sits there. It's dynamically updated all the time because we've worked with the National Institutes of Technology and with MZ Burning Glass. The three of us have kind of put together something where you can start with the nation and then drill down into a state. For example, Colorado or Washington or Chicago. And you can drill down into various types of job roles. And you can even look at all sorts of different statistics having to do with gender ratios, economic impact, the type of wages that are available. So you can also go to another site called CyberSeek. Now, it's not CyberStates, that's CyberSeek. CyberSeek's all about security. So it does kind of the same thing. You can drill down and see what kind of job openings and types of job roles and kind of what are the hot areas having to do with security. Now, take not a step back really, but take another look at things. Every year at CompTIA, we report about the kind of what the IT industry is up to. And we call it the IT Industry Outlook. And it's been fun to be part of this. I work for the research department. We do these every year. So you can actually go back in time and you can look up the 2022 and 2021 and 2020 reports. And that can be helpful because you can start seeing where technology is going, where businesses are going, and what the real needs of a business are. Because to me, if I was planning my career, I would say, okay, I got to get the right foundation. I get that, James. But I want to know where tech is going in the future, and these reports can help you do that. You can learn about things like customer experience and why that's a big deal these days for IT workers, about how the cloud is being accelerated. We talk in here about how automation is used. And there are things like Kubernetes and all that sort of thing, Docker and all that. Those are things that are very important for you to understand so that you can position yourself for success, for demand that's happening out there. Every year we put out the state of cybersecurity. That just happened, let's see, October. So it's not that old. It's just a few months old, that resource. And you can check out what the issues are and then see if you can find out what those issues are and what the root causes are. Then you can say, well, I know the root causes. Here are some solutions. That will put you in demand. So this kind of, in a sense, concludes the presentation part of this webinar. And a couple of things that usually people ask at this point. They'll say, as I get started, what are some things to do? Well, one of the things you could do is get a mentor. I don't know if I can be a mentor for you. I'm not sure. But I do think that you can connect, let's say via LinkedIn, to people and do networking. So as you learn with Sunset Learning, for example, I always tell my kids whenever they go into any classroom situation, get to know somebody in the classroom so that you can compare notes, or maybe if you miss a class, you can help each other out that way. But more importantly, networking is very important so that you can learn more about how IT is being used from other people. It's always important to bounce ideas off people. It takes a load off. So if you want, I'm happy to connect with you via LinkedIn to provide more advice and things like that. I'm also happy to answer any questions now at this time. I want to thank you very much for the time that you spent with me talking about kind of the trends that are going on, the skills that industry, seems to always need, right? And how you can get those skills. Because some of the ways that you can start, for example, you can start with something called ITF Plus. You can start with A Plus, which teaches endpoints. You take Network Plus, which will get you going into networking and understanding that. And then Security Plus gives you that fantastic kind of gateway into security. So those are just some ways in which you can go ahead and get things started. Let me
Thank
see
you
if
so
there are
much,
any
James.
questions. Hey, how you doing, Eden?
Thank you for the presentation.
You bet, man. Anytime. Man.
And guys, this was recorded, so I'll be sending out the recording tomorrow. If you want to review it or any of the resources James shared or anything, or share it with a colleague. So thank you so much for attending, and we'll see you next time.
Hey, thank you so much, man. All the best, guys. Take care.
Thank you.
If you like this video, don't forget to subscribe and click on the notification icon to get notified whenever we upload new content.